Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 6 as we move into the last quarter of this semester. Kind of insane how quickly we're going. So today I want to talk a little bit about the work for week 6. You only have 2 assignments here. You have your Unit 6 discussion board on rhetorical appeals analysis, which we'll talk about in a second, and your second knowledge checks. Now, what I want to encourage you to do, however, is to look ahead into Unit 7 if you can, or at minimum, find the argumentative essay assignment in Unit 5 that you wrote your argument, you're writing your introductory paragraph for tonight's due date. And make sure you're spending time on that as well this week, because this week's a little lighter. The idea is that you have 2 weeks really to finish up that assignment. So today we want to talk about rhetorical appeals. And essentially, every type of argument has 3 different camps of types of ways that an arguer will go about trying to convince you of their position. And the easiest way to think about this, honestly, is with advertising, because advertising is an argument, right? They're arguing that you should purchase their product, that you should support their cause, their candidate, etc. Right? And so the three appeals in this rhetorical triangle that we have are ethos, logos, and pathos. All right, and the way to write a balanced argument is to balance these 3 elements. So I'm briefly going to talk about those and give examples of those today, and then we'll go into what I want you to do with those in your discussion board. So the first corner of the triangle is ethos, which is an appeal to credibility in arguments, or rather in advertisements. You'll often see this where they employ a famous face. You know, I'm Michael Jordan and I use this foot fungus cream and you should too. You know, that sort of thing. For argumentative essays, we use ethos in a way in which we establish ourselves as an authority on the subject, right? And if you're saying, well, I'm not an authority on this subject, well, what do I do? That's why you use your sources, right? Your appeal to credibility is your ability to research and present meaningful sources that can support your claims. So that's ethos, an appeal to credibility. Pathos is the one that is probably the most used and frankly abused in politics, in argument, in advertisement. So pathos is an appeal to emotion. The reason why you would use this in trying to win an argument is that you want your audience to connect with this personally. Whatever your issue is, you want them to have a personal connection, because people aren't going to support your claim if they don't feel it in some way impacts them. Now, in advertising, pathos, I mean, especially visual advertising, you know, TV, broadcast, print media, etc. Imagery is really useful in this sense. So if you don't get this reference, I apologize, you can look it up. But there's a commercial, I think it's for the SPCA, with Sarah McLachlan singing her very sad song, and there's just like slow motion pictures of puppies and the messages that they want you to adopt or donate to the SPCA. And it's just dripping with pathos. All it is an emotional appeal. It gets you stirred up emotionally, so you feel sad, you feel like you want to help, right? So that's an appeal to pathos. The final one is logos. And we had a little bit of work this week with the difference between facts and opinion, and several of you were kind of getting confused here, that opinions aren't necessarily true or untrue. In fact, that's what makes them an opinion, is that you can't discern whether or not they are true or not. However, facts in a sense, right, we always think of as true. However, that's not always the case either. When we think of facts in this sense, what we're thinking of is something that's measurable, something that you can research, that you can decide whether it's true or not. This is the same thing with an appeal to logos. So logos is an appeal to logic or facts, measurable facts. However, that doesn't mean that the facts are true. I know that's a difficult concept to understand, but for instance, you know, in Anchorman, which is one of my favorite movies, uh, they are both Brian Fantana, which is Paul Rudd's character, and Will Ferrell are both trying to seduce the new lady, the anchor lady. And Brian Fantana, Paul Rudd's character, brings out a special cologne that he thinks will work, and he tells Ron Burgundy, Will Ferrell's character, that 60% of the time it works every time. And that's an insane thing. It doesn't make any sense, but it's still an appeal to logos because it's something, it's a measurable statistic, it's a number. So when we're thinking about logos, think about facts, think about numbers, think about things that we can measure, right? And so if you put all that together, ethos, logos, and pathos, you have a rhetorical triangle, and you have the means to make a really meaningful and impactful argument. Now, if you encounter arguments out in the wild that seem a bit skewed one way or the other, maybe it's dripping just with pathos, there's nothing else, or it's just, it's just facts, it's probably not going to be an effective argument, right? It doesn't necessarily mean it's an incorrect argument. It just means that, who wants to read something that's just facts, right? Without any appeal, emotional appeal. Conversely, you're not likely to be convinced of something if there aren't any facts or there's no credibility established with whoever's presenting the advertisement or the argument, right? So all that to say, this week, what you're going to do for your initial post by Wednesday, you're going to select an advertisement for something, anything you want, some popular product, soda, food, clothing brand, or car, whatever you want. You're going to write one paragraph considering the advertisement rhetorically by answering the specific question. How does the advertisement logically sell the product to the consumer? What emotions does the advertisement create in you after viewing it? What makes you trust the brand in the advertisement or not trust them? And you want to include a link to the advertisement in your post, right? Commercials work really well for this. So you can find commercials on YouTube pretty easily. And so make sure you link to whether it's a video or a photo. All right. And then in your peer responses due by Sunday, you're going to take a look at 2 of your classmates' advertisements and think about this specific question. If you were writing a critical review of the advertisement, what is one area you think that the advertisement could be improved upon and why? All right. And that's really the brunt of the work. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but do keep in mind that your argumentative essays are due next week. So if it were me, I would use this free time to really get ahead of the game there. The only other thing that you have to do is this knowledge check due by Sunday night. And remember, you can continue to take it as many times as you wish. Your highest grade will stand. So even if you get you get an 8 the first time and a 6 the next time, well, the 8 is the one that stands. All right. And that is essentially it for this week. If you have questions, don't hesitate to email me and ask, and I'll see you Wednesday.